rethinking about the path that we were on. I think we were heading towards a very, very fast path towards the unknown. It seemed like all the politicians of the world lost a lot of their common sense, and everybody had to sing from the same tune, same hymn book. And if you didn't sing from the same tune, then you were, blasphemized and considered a heretic and were ostracized. I think this year we gave a bit more understanding that we have to balance some of our views. Yes, the climate may be changing. It's not entirely clear how fast it's changing and what we can really do about it. But I think that we do have to come to an understanding that energy transition is going to be very important. And energy transition is not something, though many of us would, many of the people in the media expected, and the hype around that we saw the last few years expected that energy transition to be very fast, very painless, very easy. Money will just flow, things will just happen, and the consumer around the world will happily embrace using hydrogen cars and build power stations, renewable wind farms everywhere, and everything will be hunky dory. And we can basically force that change to happen by limiting investments in oil and gas and other fuels as well. I think the realization is that transitions don't happen quickly. I think I've said a number of times that transitions take decades. We were supposed to have transitioned out of coal 50 years ago. We're still transitioning out of coal. And this year, I think we use more coal than we ever used before. So transitions don't happen quickly. I think that's a message I've said very many times. But so 2023 was the year of realism that we are going to continue to need oil and gas. We are going to have to do what we can to control emissions. I think the COP23 resolution a few weeks ago was a surprise. They actually came up with more important things than I would have predicted a few before the meeting. I was very pleased to see that they are now talking about limiting methane emissions. There is absolutely no excuse for oil and gas companies to have methane emissions like they have been doing for the last 50 years. It's good that there's some rules. It's good that the US has agreed to these rules. In the past, the US was a leader in controlling methane emissions, and then with the shale gas revolution, unfortunately, they went by the wayside. We started flaring all over the place. Supposedly, they were temporary flares, but we all know they were not so temporary. And I think that now we can hopefully see that there is some regulation about controlling the methane emissions that is good for the industry, it's good for the environment, and it's also good for economics. So a no-brainer, but it took a while to get there, and I'm glad that the COP meeting got there very quickly. And then the final resolution was also quite a good surprise because it did recognize the continuing role of oil and gas. It did talk, I think maybe there was some talk about coal, but in my view, it mentioned that energy transition is going to happen. We do need to transition away from oil and gas, but we are not going to phase out of oil and gas anytime soon. And hopefully that should give a lot of the companies out there permission to continuing investment. I think I've said a number of times on this video channel that the IEA has done disservice by having these edicts, and the IBA and the World Bank as well, unfortunately, saying, oh, we should stop all investments in oil and gas immediately. And that became a fig leaf for many, many companies, financial institutions, banks, governments to stop investment. And I think that was obviously very bad. It's going to put us back in the transition because we basically just pushed the countries that couldn't afford the fancy fuels back to coal. But it did, I think, the COP statement did actually lead to something that was quite good, which is to accept that oil and gas is going to be an important part of the transition. So what do I see happening next year? I see next year as a year of balance. Balance that we have now will continue to invest in other forms of energy. I think we have to be realistic that these other forms of energy have to be affordable, they have to be available, and they have to be acceptable. We cannot force these things down the neck of our consumers. And the governments around the world have to also realize that their largesse, their hose of water, their garden hose, of funding has to come with some constraints. There were a lot of projects that were probably funded in the last few years that shouldn't be funded. There was a lot of false expectations made about how costs will come down, about how efficiencies will go up, about how well these new forms of energy are going to work. I think there's some, we have seen so many projects now being canceled: wind projects, hydrogen projects, city hydrogen transportation, city gas grid test. All of these things, a lot of them should not have got the airtime that they did. And they got the airtime that they did because of the hype in the media, the hype by the politicians, and frankly, the hype by the international energy companies that jumped on that wagon as well. Whether they believed it or not, it's hard to say, but they jumped on the wagon and only helped accelerate the flywheel. I think we now need to take a step back, say, listen, we have thrown a lot of money and a lot of craziness around things that may or may not work. Let's really look at, say, does hydrogen make sense? Does transporting hydrogen from Australia to Japan make sense at ships that are going to be at minus 250 degrees? Is that really something that we should be throwing more than just some R&D money at? I don't think we're there yet. The countries like Japan still seem to believe and drink the juice, as we say. But I think there's going to be more realization in the next year that these things are not all going to work. There may be niche things that hydrogen does work, but we have seen that most hydrogen transportation schemes around the world have failed and are quietly disappearing. Hydrogen cars are going to fail, and we're not going to see hydrogen um, for fuels, derivative fuels, such as ammonia and those things, actually be as easily available as we would all like to think they will be. So I think there's going to be a bit more balance. I see that the Shells of the world should be commended for realizing that they are, basically very good, or they think they're good at fossil fuels, and that's where they should be putting their efforts at. And they may not have any preferential knowledge or skills or differential um, expertise in wind or other energies. What do they bring to the table? They don't bring a lot of project management skills. We have seen a lot of Shell projects not do very well. They don't bring any technical skills. They bring a lot of technical skills in oil and gas, but maybe not in wind and hydrogen and other fuels such as that. And they don't really bring a lot of financing. A lot of these projects are project financed anyway. So I think it's the Shells of the world should be commended for realizing that what people invest, the shareholders will demand returns, and the returns are in what they do best, which is probably develop oil and gas projects and trade in oil and gas fuels. Shell has led the way in this. I commend them for that. I think there's other companies that will also realize that. And I think that we will see that some of the hype around alternative fuels come back to life. Hopefully, a beneficiary of this is LNG and not things like coal. I still think that coal is a low-hanging fruit that should be removed first. I've said that many times. I won't repeat myself. But what we will see as a beneficiary of LNG, when people realize that energy is very important, energy demand is continuing to grow. We see so many new LNG projects, import projects being developed. There's still a lot of talk in every country in Asia of importing LNG, every country in South America importing LNG. The number of LNG importers seems to be growing all the time. The number of countries that have LNG terminals is phenomenal now. It's hard to find a country with a coastline that does not import or export LNG. So we will see money coming back to LNG. Of course, for my own project, Gulfstream, that is great. We need the funding. I think we're close to having a bit of funding now, but I think we could always use some more funding as we go through the process. I think that this will also convince the governments that they need to continue to invest the resources into the fossil fuels, especially the low carbon fossil fuels such as gas. And I think some governments are ahead of the curve there. Some governments, I think, are behind the curve. We shall see how it all pans out in the end. I think it's great that in the last few months we have seen some gas discoveries, some major gas discoveries. The one in Indonesia comes to mind, and that I think will also encourage people to realize that natural gas is a fuel that is readily available in many parts of the world, And if it's available locally, we should use it locally as much as possible and defray the higher carbon and maybe the more exotic energy things that we have been discussing for the last couple of years that have been, frankly, a bit of a distraction. So I'm quite optimistic that 2024 is going to be the year that we see a lot of FIDs. I'm definitely going to see a few FIDs in the US. I hope Texas LNG is one of them because I'm still the founder of Texas LNG and a shareholder. So I would like to see them go ahead. But there's other projects I think that are on the brink. I think that the mess that we have seen in some of the US projects, the soap opera, the Tellurian soap opera, potentially the Venture Global soap opera, I hope that's all behind us and we can actually get back to what we do best, which is develop LNG export projects. It's great to see how US natural gas prices have stayed so low. I think they're in the $2 something range. That just highlights what a great resource the US is for LNG exports. I think globally, even though we've had all these wars, natural gas prices haven't really risen that much in the last 12 months. We haven't seen LNG prices spike much in the last 12 months, even though we have had wars. I hope that the unrest in the Red Sea doesn't impact any LNG shipping. So far, it hasn't, but who knows how it will happen down the road. We shall see some FIDs, maybe in one or two in Canada, maybe something in Mexico. It depends. Maybe we'll see some things in Africa, which kind of brings me back to my last point I want to discuss is actually the big picture issue, which is community relations, the license to operate. The IOCs of the world, the national energy companies of the world, have been the ones I think that have really not been a very good example of license to operate locally. They have in the past, and I don't know how much things have changed. They like to say things have changed, but on the ground, I don't think they have. That they work for the community, they work for the local environment, they work for the local population. That's often not the case. Oftentimes, when international oil companies operate in different parts of the world, the last people that benefit from their operations are the people that live right near the plant. They're the ones that are the least educated to get the jobs. They're the ones that suffer any environmental fallout. They're the ones that suffer from the pollution, or not in the environmental, but any from the traffic, etc., the high rising cost of living for themselves. Uh, and that's not been good. So we actually need to maybe pledge that as we go forward, the social license to operate is very important. If we don't have the social license to operate, it can cost us billions and billions of dollars, just as Total in Mozambique. The social license to operate was obviously not there, which led to the civil war, which led to years and years of delay. I think that Total and others will probably realize that spending a little bit of funding to help the local populace is probably a really good thing. It only can help everybody. It can help make their project a success. It can give some of the community, the local community, buy into the success of their project, maybe give them some jobs, maybe give them some economic benefits. And hopefully that'll be a lesson that we see out of the Total Mozambique, the Anadarko Total Mozambique saga. So let's hope that there's more community involvement. That also goes to case in for the U.S. projects. Obviously, I spend lots of time in the Gulf Coast. Some of the poorest parts of the U.S. are in the Gulf Coast, not far from the LNG projects and the other energy projects. I think we can do a better job of helping the local community and not just giving money to the state politicians or the local politicians or the federal politicians. Actually, go out and make sure that the local people benefit as well. So, with that, I wish everybody a happy new year, a great festive season. Let's make 2024 a fantastic year. Let's hope it's a more peaceful year for all of us. And thank you again. I was recognized as one of the top influencers in the energy business by Gas Strategies. I appreciate that. I'm always just having fun doing this. I think that we need more independent voices like mine. So feel free to start your own video channels and speak your mind. So let's look forward to a fantastic 2024 for all of us. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye bye.